If you are thinking about moving to Mexico City, I need you to watch this video. There are so many people who I have met or seen or encountered from places like the United States and Europe with a certain level of privilege who are living in Mexico City who are exasperating the signs around the city that are telling gringos to go home and to go back to where they came from. I feel many types of ways about those signs and about the general anti-foreigner sentiment in Mexico City. For the most part, I agree with the locals because there have been so many examples that I have encountered in which foreigners simply do not lead with respect and the intention to be a part of the city in a responsible, kind, and sustainable manner. And what I want every person who moves here or who travels here to understand is that Mexico City has a culture and a people who have existed far, 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 far long before any of us heard about Mexico City. It has had immigrant communities far, far, far long before New York suddenly became obsessed with Mexico City, far long before LA suddenly became obsessed with Mexico City. Like, I feel like the common thread between the types of foreigners who do not lead with conscientiousness or kindness or social awareness is the subconscious idea that they discovered Mexico City. Like I'll be meeting some people who like just moved here, and it's shocking to hear just the general ethos of their speech. The way people worship Condesa as like the origin of Mexico itself, or worship just these very gentrified spaces and spaces honestly that look and feel similar to New York or LA, but maybe it's just easier for people to enjoy the effects of gentrification without confronting them because it's no longer in their own country. Being like, oh my God, like it's so cheap here. Just think about who lives in this city. It's not cheap for the majority of people in Mexico City. So why say that in the first place? Being like, oh my God, like there's just something about Mexico City. Like there's just something magical about Condesa. Like I feel so calm here. It's like, yes, girl, you can afford things. Like you can afford things and you can walk around easily because financial stress is such a big part of life. And when you remove that, you suddenly have a lot of space, a lot less anxiety, a lot more time to just enjoy the things in your day and to walk around freely as a human being. And it's great that people can find that in other places in the world, but we also have to understand like at what cost and what is our role now in this new society that we've moved into? Because there are still millions and millions of people who do not have that. And there are still millions and millions of people who are facing the similar types of oppression that maybe we faced in our home countries, and maybe that's why we left. And if we do not acknowledge how we are now playing a part in that cycle, we are just putting it on other people. Literally the other day, I went to this taco shop. I was eating my tacos with my boyfriend, and behind him, there was this table of two girls. They looked American or European. They sounded American with like that Valley Girl accent, who did not even bother to attempt to order in Spanish. This, for my partner, is like annoying whenever we encounter it. And we encounter it a lot, obviously, because Mexico City is a huge tourist destination and has been for a long time. And my partner is Mexican. He's been living in the city for almost 10 years. In this specific instance, this girl was essentially just speaking English in the way that I feel white Americans and white Europeans so often do, which is just so loud and so space occupying, to the point where you could hear her from any corner of the restaurant. So she orders in blatant English. She's like, I'll have this and this and this, blah, blah, blah. She orders a Diet Coke. The waitress comes and brings her a Coke Zero. And then she's like, no, this isn't what I ordered. And the waitress, who did not speak English, is like, Coca Zero, like, this is all we have. And she proceeded to just look at the waitress and be like, this is not what I ordered. She was like, Diet Coke. She was like, Diet Coke. And she said it over and over again. And it was so rude to the point where my partner, he like turns around and he helps the waitress and he like translates for them, because it's so excruciating to hear this woman just scream English in the restaurant with such an entitlement as to like, to even expect someone to speak English in Mexico is an entitled part of our privilege coming from the global north. Like privilege that is tied to the oppression of people all around the world. Like our passports have so much power, the United States passport, the European passport, the UK passport, because our economies subsist off of exploiting other people in other nations. And for me, it's like that fundamental understanding of American privilege, of European privilege, and of what it means to move into a space like Mexico and have no intention of learning the language or understanding how things we say are going to be perceived by the local communities. That is what really just makes me side with the people who are like, go back to where you came from. Like that language is problematic, obviously, because it's kind of copying the same anti-immigration language in the US. And for decades, there have been different types of immigrants who have moved to Mexico, Asian people, Black people, you name it. Like there are all these histories of people immigrating to Mexico being treated poorly because they are not Mexican, etc. However, I understand the frustration from any Mexican person towards a foreigner moving into their space because there are examples like that girl at that restaurant. People who are not thinking about how they are taking up space. Like if a person invites you to their home, you would not just trash their house, eat all their food, look at everything and be like, oh, it would be so much better if it looked like my apartment in New York, and try to move things around and not even attempt to communicate with them. Like that is just the epitome of Western privilege and of privilege itself. I also feel just extraordinarily sensitive to this topic of like foreigners in Mexico City because I think being a person of color from the US, I am hyper analyzing everything. Like I'm overly conscious of how I move around in this city, and I don't want to have a harmful impact anywhere that I live. So it's like I'm constantly thinking about how I am taking up space in this city. I try to support local businesses. I'm trying to learn Spanish. I try to build strong relationships with the people that I meet on the street and the people that I meet in daily life, and not only kind of build this like romantic bubble of only foreigners who also speak English, who are also living and breathing the same way that I am, with the same privilege that I have. And so I realize that I am probably being super sensitive to a lot of these things. However, I feel like there are too many people who are not sensitive enough. And it's like if we choose to move anywhere where we suddenly have a power dynamic that serves us, we need to be extra conscious about how that power is being exerted and how we are contributing to the local economy and to the communities that we are a part of. And I've actually been like writing an essay on this, and it's so difficult to wrap my head around because I'm an Asian American living in Mexico, and I have, bottom line, so much privilege being an American, earning in dollars and having the spending power that I do. And for the most part, I'm like, yes, all foreigners just need to be more conscientious. However, the language of go back to where you came from is a little bit triggering because Chinese Americans and Japanese Americans have heard that for decades, you know, in the US. And then now hearing it here, it's like, oh, okay, being a child of an immigrant anywhere, you don't really belong anywhere. When you look at the history of Mexico, a lot of people who have immigrated, who are people of color or who are from China or from Africa or from the US, people like me or people like my friends who are Black or my friends who are Middle Eastern, there is a lot of racism. For example, like there was an entire massacre of Chinese people in Torreon, and I did not know that. And like there's a whole history of just Filipinos and Chinese moving and essentially also being enslaved by the Spanish. When I walk around, I get stared at a lot, and it's taken me a long time to feel just okay being here. And I feel like at times a lot of the blame for gentrification, for rises in cost of living, are attributed to foreigners moving into Mexico City, which I think definitely plays a part. However, there's really no responsibility taken by the Mexican populations that are making a lot of these things happen. Like essentially the top 1% of Mexicans who own the real estate that gringos are renting out, who are starting these businesses, profiting off of the huge wave in immigration and tourism into Mexico City. Like, it makes me stop and wonder, like, why is there no conversation around fresas being the problem when they generally are? It's not accurate for Mexican society to blame all of their problems, like gentrification, on the foreigner archetype. However, I understand that train of thought because there is just so much pressure. There's so much classism, there's so much colorism, and there's so much racism within Mexico itself that I think it's potentially easier to target an outgroup and relate to your fellow Mexicans because the Mexican national identity is so strong, and simply target the outgroup of foreigners and demonize them, as opposed to looking inwards and being like, oh, okay, we're actually part of a system that hasn't worked for the majority of its people for a long time. But it's like, that's also not any Mexican's responsibility. Like, it's not any Mexican person or citizen's responsibility to like look inward and like fix the government, because it's like, is that ever actually gonna happen? And so I think it is in the end helpful to have these sentiments of like, hey, like maybe not gringos go back to where you came from, but like, hey, if you're here, be here conscientiously, like be a good contributor to Mexico City. Like, don't just be here to like take our shit, to create business opportunities for yourself, to look at Mexico City as a gold mine, essentially. Like the way some people talk about it who I've met from California or New York or Europe, they talk about Mexico City like a gold mine. They're like, it needs a bar scene like New York. I'm gonna open a hotel. I'm gonna do XYZ. Like, I'm gonna buy property. And it's like their third day in the city. They haven't learned anything about the people, anything about the culture, anything about the water crisis that's going on, the infrastructure, the language. Like, it's like, slow down and first recognize what exists here and honor it, and then figure out how you can become a part of it. This is not a tree for you to like mark your initials in. This is an entire ecosystem of people and businesses and cultures who have been existing for a long ass time. And I feel like that is honestly what's missing whenever any like privileged person comes into a space where they suddenly gain more privilege. Whether that's Mexico City, whether that's Bali, whether that's Bangkok, like all kind of these places that are becoming global hubs for people from the global north. It feels like the thought processes and the behaviors, while they might not be intentional, the energy is giving colonizer. Whenever I hear like someone just talk about Mexico City as like this haven for their own growth or their own spiritual realization or their own economic abundance, like, it's great. We should all be chasing those things, but we can't do it while stomping on other people. And so if you choose to move here, or if you choose to travel here, I just like, this goes for anything. I feel like after traveling so much in my life and like living different places, I just feel like it's extraordinarily important to take the time to pause and recognize the culture and the people that you are visiting. Like, honor them. And I think people don't take that time because they kind of view other places as an escape from their normal life, or as a pivot, like an evolution from their normal life. And so they're not thinking about like the broader picture and like what it means to be a part of this world at large, but they're thinking more about their own lives. And it's like, oh, finally, it's an escape to Mexico City, as if it's like just this beach destination. And same with beach destinations. Like, that's why a lot of beach destinations become also so gentrified, and the local populations are pushed out, and the economy like becomes solely reliant on tourism. And I just feel like we all need to travel more conscientiously. And if we are people who move around the globe, we especially need to do the work to be good immigrants, or expats, or global citizens, whatever you want to call it. That is my only ask of people who are moving here. And I am going to continue to grapple with the fractured identity of being an Asian American living in Mexico City, living in Mexico, and I'm going to constantly try and be better and learn how to be better and be a good person, for lack of a better word. And I will try to share that here. But I feel like the bottom line is, first we have to just understand how the world works. Like, there's a reason why some people have more and some people have less. And that is, to put it quite generally, the structure of capitalism and imperialism. And although we might not be the 1% owns the businesses that creates this inequity, or the governments that create this inequity and funds these wars, which further creates inequity and adds to the pockets of the wealthy, if we are in a space of privilege, we are agents of that system. And I'm not saying like, okay, everyone should just renounce their privilege, or no one should move to Mexico City because it means we're a part of this system. We're going to be a part of the system no matter what. But if we're a part of the system, then I hope that we would be encouraged and motivated to understand our role in it and understand how we can hopefully create some semblance of change in terms of how we are moving about the world, so that the people around us feel respected and supported and comfortable. I suck at Spanish. I suck at learning languages. Like, I genuinely do not understand how my brain is so good at putting together words and writing and certain types of tasks, but then when it comes to learning a freaking language, I want to literally unalive myself because I'm a baby, and it's taken me 3 years to progress from baby to like little kid stage, but I am still trying my hardest, because it does not make sense for anyone to move to Mexico without learning Spanish. You are essentially cutting yourself off from 90% of the experience of living in Mexico. Just try it. Like, it means a lot to try, and it means a lot to just speak it whenever you can, because it makes people feel more comfortable and more open. We are moving to Mexico City for pleasure, for life quality, for all these different things. We have privilege. And with privilege comes responsibility.